Uachtaráin Ramaphosa, Uachtaráin na Public Africas, Ambassadorius Corcheliag. May I just say how welcome you all are. It is an absolutely splendid occasion for which I have waited, and I'm so delighted it has come to be, to welcome His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa. And on behalf of Svina Mahan son Mavan Kela Saivin, Ferrum Firkin Fuchero Villig, on behalf of Sabina and myself, may I say how pleased we are to welcome you today, President, and those who are travelling with you to what has been the home of all Irish presidents since 1938, Áras and Uachtaráin. It is a great honour. Our friendship goes back a long time, for many years, and I think our last meeting was when we spoke at the last year's United Nations General Assembly, and I was very, very pleased we were able to discuss so many issues that were then present, but there were also ones that were going to confront us in the future. The essence of our ties, I think, is shared in a commitment to freedom and justice, and in that Ireland and South Africa have a special relationship. I think it is probably embedded in a struggle for independence, and in the course of that long struggle and its resolution, an emphasis on the importance of dignity, equality, and basically looking at all the different strategies of exclusion that were part of a colonial enterprise. We have, I think, in the discussions that we've had today but long before, a kind of a kinship in so many areas. We've discussed food security, for example, and how the particular approach we've been advancing is one that breaks dependence, a kind of universal access to vaccines. So much of the exploitation and failure of the wild was revealed internationally during the COVID crisis. To build something, a project we all share, and which is, of course, part of what your own preparations to for G20, is the building of a reformed United Nations and the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the recovery of the momentum to what we have agreed in 2015. I think South Africa's contribution, the role played by your predecessor Nelson Mandela, and indeed by yourself, President Ramaphosa, in particular in the Northern Ireland peace process, are something for which the people of Ireland will always be deeply grateful. We recalled it when we were hearing of the news of the passing of Marty Atasari, and your contribution, both of your contributions, which are so important. I was in the Dole, I think, when Nelson Mandela made his speech in 1990 visiting Ireland, in which he called for a negotiated end to the conflict in Northern Ireland and spoke of his hopes for a new South Africa. And then, I think, visiting Dublin Castle during the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation, which was chaired by Catherine McGuinness, a distinguished member of the legal profession. And that was after the 1994 ceasefires in which you, President, participated, offering your advice based on your own contributions to the negotiations for the ending of apartheid in South Africa 4 years earlier. It started with the establishment, too, I think, what is just so important in your role as an inspector. I have referred to as an independent international commission and decommissioning was just so important. Your reaching out to the marginalised include visiting prisoners in the Maze prison, along with Maharaj. I think the invaluable contribution as well of the 1997 conference on the lessons of South African transition, organised by the government of South Africa in the Western Cape, which was held at a critical juncture in the peace process. Ireland, for its part, I think, stood firmly against the racist policy of the apartheid regime imposed on black South Africans. And I think, I suppose that's the time when I was meeting so many people that The anti-apartheid movement here, and we have already you mentioned already, Kat Rasmel and Louise, and I think Joan Burton, who is here, knows about those very, very early meetings. But actually the opposition to apartheid contains lessons for the future as well. It is, they didn't just fall and evolve overnight. It took brave people who were willing to stand in front of those who thought that issues of economics or trade were more important than issues of rights. In 2018, opening an exhibition to mark the centenary of the birth of Nelson Mandela, I recalled with pride the contribution of the Irish people to South Africa's struggle. It started with the establishment of the Irish chapter of the anti-apartheid movement in 1964 by our good friend, the late Count Rasmal and his wife Louise. And I do want to take the opportunity to once again offer my condolences as present to the Rasmal family on the recent death of Louise, who with Carter worked tirelessly to make the recent death to make the Irish anti-apartheid movement a truly inclusive movement. Carter, together with Albie Sachs, authored the first draft of the South African Bill of Rights, which would go on to become a cornerstone of the South African Constitution, a document widely recognised as one of the most progressive and just of its kind. How often Carter recalled that about the two of them, when Louise having to tell them to lower their voices as they worked it out in the kitchen of their house. There were many who helped the movement when it really mattered. Its first secretary was former Minister Barry Desmond, and in the 1980s, former Taoiseach Joan Burton, who was here, and I welcome Joan particularly today, because Joan was the person who brought me into the thing very, very, very early on, and her husband Pat. She was secretary of the Irish chapter in the 1980s. I recall the Springboks tour, indeed, of 1970 as an especially pivotal moment. And I think it was, in later, I was standing with Noel Brown outside the gate. We had a minimum, some of us, we tried to cover every gate. It was a day of pouring rain, Joan, if you remember. And I remember distinctly Noel standing there with his placard, "Box, go home." I think that in many cases too, no longer with us, a colleague of mine, Jimmy Kemme, who was organising the protests down in Limerick City. And that was a much more conflictual outing. I think that the anti-apartheid movement played a significant role in influencing the Irish government to become the first Western government to support sanctions against apartheid in South Africa in 1970. It was a touchstone moment of enormous moral and exemplary significance in the struggle that yielded emancipatory results. Mary Manning's moral action with her brave fellow Dunn Stores workers 41 years ago, refusing to handle the sale of goods from South Africa produced under conditions of apartheid. They are taking action to demonstrate solidarity with people who have been denied basic human rights. And I'm so pleased that some of the former Dunn Stores workers are with us this afternoon. And I also dare say as well, is that those of us who were around at the times, but remember that is that not everybody was congratulating them at that particular time. There were the ones who sailed past. And so therefore, rather like a word you use yourself, President Ramaphosa, there was need for transformation, and it happened, and it had to be encouraged. The support that was manifest between our peoples in the formative years of our story always is carried by a vibrant friendship that exists between Ireland and South Africa, which continues, I'm very happy to say, to this day. The political ties have strengthened, and I think since the end of the apartheid period, I think that Ireland's original forms of development cooperation, and that some of the ones that have been continued today contribute to efforts to reduce gender-based violence and to help with resourcing the treatment of HIV and AIDS. A key feature of Ireland's cooperation programme is the Cadrasmal Fellowship, the fully funded scholarship opportunity offered to South African students to study at master's level in Ireland. I think there are 12 currently in the postgraduate programme. I think, as well as that, I think that this will be incredibly important in sharing our efforts to support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Also, to advance the role of women in the sciences, and particularly in the corporate sector, women's participation in STEM subjects. There is, and I've been interested in some of the contemporary Irish playwrights and Irish writers, have had wonderful adaptations into African circumstances of some of our best known places. And I think South Africans in Ireland embracing Irish literature, African literature, music and dance, its adaptations, is deeply appreciated. I think the festivals and the academic associations associated with Charlotte McSecky, Mary Robinson Studies Chair, that connection between Western Cape and Trinity College is a very valuable connection. I think in Ireland at the present time we are home to about 16,000 South Africans, and the Irish diaspora in South Africa is smaller, but over 100,000 people in South Africa claim some sort of connection with us, which is valuable. Now, Sabina and I had the most wonderful opportunity of when we paid an official visit to the Republic of South Africa in 2014. The visit demonstrated us the progress that your country had been made in healing the wounds of the past, building a foundation for the positive role that South Africa now plays in the wider region, and all of the challenges too. And what was very impressive was the way the people spoke of the challenges that they were facing and the different circumstances that stood behind them. I think that it is very, very, very much that all of the challenges that remain are challenges now, as I've been mentioning, climate change and the rise of armaments rather than of peace. The challenge of all, there are now the challenges of all humanity in achieving an economy, as we discussed privately, the economy based on sufficiency and inclusion. I think both of our countries' histories in the modern times demonstrates that peace and reconciliation are possible, even in the most trying of circumstances. And people like to see things working, and they will. President, I recall our own meeting when, in the margins of the 79th United Nations General Assembly, and we discussed all of these issues, and including the situation in Gaza, the pressing climates of climate change and food security, as well as the need to reform approaches, as I have been discussing with you, from development to an African anthropology that will serve Africa. May I take this opportunity to repeat Ireland's support for the case taken by South Africa alleging genocide by Israel in Gaza. It has been received which has been received by the International Court of Justice. I welcome Irish lawyer Blinny Grolig, who is part of the advisory to the South Africa's legal team on these crucial proceedings. Ireland's filing of a declaration of intervention, along with other countries that have filed such declarations, is an important step. It will require asking for the interpretation of what constitutes the commission of genocide by a state to be widened. I think as well there isn't any doubt whatsoever, following the United Nations expert report, that what is taking place is genocide. I go further and say that what the text tells us is the existence of an intention of genocide. And we discussed in our own meeting in relation to the significance of dropping leaflets in the sky, giving 48 hours to 1 million people to move into what is not an area of safety, but one of death. I think that report by the United Nations Commission, as President of Ireland, I have to say, it fills me with great sorrow that what was in fact a right a right in relation to be independent, which is what the Palestinian state is based on, is being reduced at times into the notion of conditions that must be met. If the conditions of the abuse of the powerful are invoked, it means that the right itself is being questioned. I think that, as well as that, could I have paid a price myself? I must have the agony of looking on at not just those who have lost their lives, but also the malnourished children, the women feeding babies deprived of water, medicines, food. It is one of the lowest times in the history of humanity. And to call it out and to oppose it and to say that what Prime Minister Netanyahu, in support of President Herzog, is in fact shames humanity. And I think that it is, we discussed, I mentioned it in our former meeting in a way, that the ease with which the abuse of being called anti-Semitic was used was too easily accepted in the Western world. It should have been slammed down as for the propaganda that it was much clearer. And I think that the fact that it works in the way that it has kept some of our European partners still silent when it is so clear what is taking place, which is a matter for their shame. I think that war and militarism have become hegemonic in our discourse. It is so different, I think. And I think that what will succeed your G20 and succeed in Bell will be a return to responsibility for the planet, life in all its diversity, peace, cooperation, and the fundamental moral question that we're asked at the basis of all scholarship: are we in existence to cooperate or in existence to seek to destroy each other? I think that Africa is such an exciting continent. 42% of the young people of the world, by 2030, 50%. And I think that's 1.5 billion people. I say to many of my colleagues in Europe and around the world, every now and again some of them say, 1.4 billion or 1.5 billion, it's a great market. It is not just a great market. It is 1.5 billion of the youngest people who, in fact, will define our future. It is they who will save and restructure the United Nations. It is they who will, in fact, reconcile issues of ecological responsibility with justice and with economy. I think that it is for that reason, and I'm coming to the conclusion, that I have chosen in my own approach towards food sovereignty to build it around breaking dependence. The idea that meeting sufficiency, concentrating on the surplus in relation to what is appropriate for trade, but also in relation to that, I do think that it will in fact combine. I call it a globalization from below. That beyond food sufficiency and with the basic universal goals, greater participation in education, there will be a whole rising. And it will not be about imitation of failed Western models. It'll be about doing things in an entirely new way. And that's why your meeting, for which we're very grateful that you invited Ireland to be there and for G20. I believe future historians may write about it in the same way as people wrote about enlightenments, and they will say it was the time of the Great Revision when people decided to change everything and to stand up where it wasn't working. I do think there were so many areas we cooperated in the past, very much in relation to matters of LGBTQ plus matters, and I would certainly say you were going to be a staunch defender of those basic human rights issues when things are changing all around you, and other right-wing views that have been inflicted on parts of Africa will need to be opposed. South Africa's post-apartheid constitution was the first in the world to outlaw discrimination based on sexual orientation. And in 2006, South Africa became the first country in Africa to legalize same-sex marriage. It is a proud heritage and achievement to be defended. And I think that There are many people outside the major cities who do face challenges, including homophobic violence and high rates of HIV/AIDS infections. We support the efforts of your country in ensuring full inclusivity in relation to these rights, regardless of you have my support. I am encouraged by the ever-increasing strength of cooperation, and it is underscored by your invitation to us to be present at G20. I know that there are many goals, and many of us admit transformation is a process that is complex. I want to wish you every success in it all, in every complex and more difficult part of it too. I think that ours and Ireland and South Africa, it's something that we must invoke again and again, to see people as fellow humans, a basic dignity that requires, in fact, the meeting of different challenges. In that we will work together. I think that we are at the Irish government too, I know, is anxious to enhance these connections, celebrating our joint achievements, and as I think the meetings today, exploring new opportunities for cooperation. I will say it in Irish as I began in Irish, and then I will say it in the other language. I would say to about it is Irim Shas agus muite Turonoris gradam the winter poblacht after Cas agus Cohoire Uachtaráin, Cyril Ramaphosa. Ladies and gentlemen, may I propose a vote of toast to the good health of the people of South Africa, and in particular its distinguished leader, President Ramaphosa, all of the people of South Africa, and to continuing friendship and cooperation between our countries. Mila buikas don talki. Every blessing to both for the future.